But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me.
Very excited to get into this series as we explore the book of Ruth. I think it's going to be just an incredible time for us to unpack just ancient truths. It is so important. Oh, church family, it is so important that we don't just briefly skim over the Bible, but we take time to really get into it, especially some of these Old Testament stories that are incredibly powerful. Let's pray and we're going to jump in. Lord, I love you. I thank you so much for your word. I thank you for the presentation of your word. I love hearing it proclaimed through creative arts. I love to be able to hear it proclaimed through music and word. And now we want to take time to even jump into your word and do it in a little bit of an academic way and understand history, background, tradition, God, what played into this that made it so powerful. And then ultimately we want to turn the corner and give the people that are here, us as a corporate group, opportunity to participate in the spiritual formation as well. All of this is yours. In your glorious name, I pray. Amen. All right, so today we jump into the book of Ruth, and I'm excited about this. Really, in all honesty, if I could sum it all up, it would be this. The book of Ruth has God doing really miraculous things in very non-big, show-off, miraculous ways. Like it's everyday hardship, everyday difficulties, and God doing really big things, but without all the big flash and miracles. So much of the Bible is full of these amazing stories that are over the top. I mean, you're watching the dead come to life, the blind seeing, like the valley of dry bones. Literally flesh is wrapping around the bones and bringing it back together. And man, in this text, as we jump into Ruth, did I break something, Zach? I'm breaking something. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm messing everything up. Zach is amazing. We just thank you, Zach, for all your work. And you don't like being called out. Don't pay attention to the legs behind the TV. Those are some great legs, Zach, by the way. Some great legs. But in the book of Ruth, man, and I love this. I love the story that's there. I love the way that God works in such powerful, miraculous ways, but he does so without the flash. Without the big over-the-top miracles. And I think for us, a lot of us, it's the same way. Like we're living everyday normal lives. How is God doing miraculous things in the normal? To jump into this, I was amazed with all the decision cards that came back last week. I was amazed how many of you loved my dad joke, right? The dad, anybody, you enjoyed the dad joke? Come on, a few of you, that's all right. So I got another one for you. And believe it or not, this has incredible purpose. The dad joke fires the mind off well. It's good to get you to think about what you're thinking about, and dad jokes make you do that. So if you roll your eyes, that's a win. I'm okay with that. Are you ready for this? Dad joke. So you got to really pay attention or you'll miss it. Today I had my son ask me, "Dad, can I have a bookmark?" I was a little frustrated. I thought, man, after 15 years, he still doesn't know my name is Mike. Can I have a bookmark? Don't know. Say, there it is. You can watch the plane land. Can I have a bookmark? My name is Mike. There you go. Okay, now that your brains are firing, let's jump into this. Dad jokes are the best. They're the best and the worst. That's what makes them the best. No, the truth is it's really important to know who you are and where you're from. Now, I want to take some time this morning, just a few minutes, and I want to place the story of Ruth in the right chronological order through history. So you have like creation. God makes it all in Genesis. You have the flood. After the flood, right? Creation, fall, flood. After the flood, then you have another series of crazy cool stories. Then you ultimately have the Exodus out of Egypt. And out of the Exodus out of Egypt, they're making their way to the Promised Land. And when they finally land in the Promised Land, a leader by the name of Joshua takes over. You guys remember the story of Joshua? Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. You got it, right? So then you have Joshua. So you have creation, fall, flood, then some other cool stories, then the Exodus, and then you have Joshua. Now, when Joshua dies, something happens to the Hebrew people. Now, what's supposed to take place is God has called the Hebrew people to literally be a witness to the world. So think the Hebrew people migrating into a community, and then they are spreading the good news and works and ways of Jesus externally. But instead of that happening, what happens after Joshua's death is all of the external values begin to migrate into the Hebrew people, especially the Canaanites. So think of it this way. If you've maybe ever gotten a job, right? And so you take your job and you're going into the workplace. Instead of you being a witness for Jesus in the workplace and their ethics and values begin being a witness in you. You start sharing their jokes. You start valuing what they value. You start going to the bar after church and hanging out. You start doing everything they do. Instead of you influencing them, they're influencing you. This happened after Joshua's death. In fact, so much of the time of Judges ended up becoming an infiltration. So all of this Canaanite value, we're talking weird stuff. This is brutal time in Hebrew history. It's bloody. There's famine, there's hardship. They're adopting sexual practices that are external in. I mean, the Canaanites especially had like child sacrifices. This is a very dark season in Hebrew history. And so in the middle of all of this chaos, right, so creation, fall, flood, some other cool stories, Exodus. After the Exodus, Joshua dies. The Hebrew people just kind of fall apart. And so God raises up from these people these judges. In fact, the book literally opens up in the time of Judges. The judges really are kind of like warlords. I mean, even the story of like Samson, this is not God's ideal plan. He is working with very broken people in a very broken time in Hebrew history trying to establish some form of order. In fact, I want to make a couple of statements, especially as we study this time. I have had more questions about this section of Hebrew history than I do any other parts of the Bible. Because they're like, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow that to happen? Why does God let this take place? Why does God call his people to do these things? Let me be really clear. Not everything, in fact, I've got this up here. I want you to see this if it works. Not everything the Bible reports does the Bible endorse. Not everything the Bible reports, the Bible endorses. Now, this is really important to remember because there are a lot of times in history where the Bible is reporting things that are played out and God is even involved in it, but none of it was God's ideal way that he wanted it to happen. You got to remember, God didn't even want a king by the time David rolls around. So not everything the Bible reports, the Bible endorses. The next big idea that we have to remember as we get into this is this. God will use even sinful, flawed people and sinful, flawed systems to accomplish his will. Not everything the Bible reports, the Bible endorses, and God will use even sinful, flawed people and systems to accomplish his will. And this kind of really is, those two things are the meta message of the time of the Judges. This is like the Dark Ages in Hebrew history. It's muddy. Even the good people were very flawed during this season. Now, that's big picture. I want to zoom in just a little bit tighter. So now we have two players, Naomi. Well, we have a few different players. Primarily, let's start with her. We have Naomi. Now, so Naomi is a victim of all of these cultural hardships being poured out on her. She has grown up in a system that's bloody. She's grown up in a system that has been infiltrated by all kinds of external values. She has grown up in a time when there has been famine, when there has been hardship. It is a brutal season in history. And in the middle of this hardship, her and her husband eventually decide, we can't even stay in the promised land anymore. Sin has so poisoned even the promised land, we can't even stay here. And so Naomi and her husband they come together and they leave with their 2 boys, and they exit out of that area and they move into a region outside of the promised land that God had given them. Over there, they end up marrying 2 Moabite women. So now you have Naomi, and you have her husband and her sons who have married 2 Moabite women. And in the middle of all this hardship, middle of all this loss, middle of their identity being eroded away by external things coming into culture, in the middle of all this, Naomi faces even more hardship, and all the men in her life die. Her husband dies, and her sons die. Now, I really don't think many of us can understand the amount of loss that this woman has been through. Her nation is corrupt and lost its way. I mean, these military-type leaders, even internally, God's having to use some pretty flawed tents to do his work. Famine has pushed her out. They've landed in this foreign land. Her sons have married Moabite women, and then her sons die and her husband dies. Now, for a widow at this time in history, this is a death sentence. She turns to her 2 daughters, and you pick this up. These girls did such a great job this morning portraying it. But she turns to her daughters and she says to them, listen, she pretty much says, why don't you 2 stay here in your homeland? You have a better chance of survival staying here than you do coming with me. So you 2 stay here. Hopefully God will bless you. Hopefully your God will even bless you. Stay with your God, she even says. She is in a bad place. Naomi is. And in the middle of this conversation of her trying to convince them to stay, one of them says, all right, I'll stay with my people in my land. And the other one goes, I won't leave you. And that's where we pick it up in the text today. So zooming in, creation, fall, flood, number of things happen, Exodus, Joshua, time of Judges. It's a dark season in Hebrew history. She feels forced out by her own people. Her husband has died. Her boys have died. She's there with her 2 foreign daughter-in-laws, and she's trying to convince them to stay, and she decides to try to go back home and see if she can even just survive. That's where we pick up in the text. Ruth 1:13b through 18. No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter for me for your sake, and the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Notice her language. It is so negative against God. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her, and she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. She's literally saying to her daughter-in-law, go back to your own gods, because mine has failed me. That's a huge statement from a very bitter, frustrated woman. But Ruth said, so the Moabite daughter-in-law, Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her and said no more, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full with my boys and my son, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has calamity upon me? All right, a couple things to note from this as we begin to get into the big idea of this book, the book of Ruth. As Naomi returns home, the whole town was stirred. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where something embarrassing happens, right? So like maybe you're in a public place hanging out with some people and you pass gas. I just said that in church on Sunday. Is that okay? And everybody looks around, and they're like, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Now, the beauty of having little kids is you blame them. You're like, oh, that's sorry about that, right? But everybody stares at you and looks at you. You get like that kind of critical eye, what's going on? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where something happens and all eyes are on you and it's not in a good way. Well, this is like that times 10,000. She shows back up into town. This is not a good time in Hebrew history. There's already been famine. It's hardship all the way around. She shows back up, and they're like, is that Naomi? The whole town is stirred. And what does she show up with? She shows up with a Moabite woman, an immigrant. The whole town is stirred. Now, the crazy thing in the middle of this is all eyes are on her, but she doesn't know that God notices her too, but God notices her in a way different way with optimism. Another thing I want to point out is this. In her greatest time of struggle, so in this season, right, Naomi's greatest time of struggle, she asks to change her name to bitter. She even says it's God's fault that all this has happened. Now, let's pause and put ourselves in the middle of this story for just a moment. I don't know about you. Have you ever been at a spot where you face enough hardship or it feels like God has just stripped stuff away from you, or at least allowed it to happen? When you're in a season of loss, in a season of frustration, in a season where it feels like it's all gone and you can't help but even be angry at God, that's where she's at. Now, the crazy thing in this is God has already begun the process of rescue, even though she feels and all she can see is rubbish. God's already begun the process of rescue. In fact, maybe a clearer way to say it would be this. Even in her bitterness and sorrow and hopelessness, Naomi was still putting her trust in God and pursuing Him by returning to her homeland and God's people. While it may seem small, it was enough faith for God to do a great work. Okay, and I want to pause here for a moment. It is possible to be faithful and frustrated at the same time. It is possible to have doubts and still commit to be faithful at the same time. Did you know that the Bible is full of examples where there are individuals that are wrestling with what they believe or why they believe it? They are in seasons of doubt, or people that are in seasons where they are really frustrated with God, even blaming Him for their pain, and they still choose to stay faithful. Even right now, for those sitting in this room that are going through seasons of hardship, you can be in the middle of really frustrating things. You can even be really frustrated with God and still choose in your heart to stay faithful. It's possible. You can have seasons of doubt and still commit to being faithful. You can be frustrated with God and still commit to be faithful. Another big idea that we need to unpack from these opening sections of Scripture is this. Ruth, her daughter-in-law that stayed with her, so the Moabite daughter-in-law that stayed with her, makes an incredible statement. Okay, so I want to just read this again and put it in front of you one more time. Ruth to Naomi, "For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Now, a lot of weddings have this first part because it's really like fun and sweet and wonderful. I'm going to start adding this part into weddings too and see what people say, right? So, where you die, I will die. So we're going to do that in the vows. Where you die, I will die. Oh, so sweet. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. This is massive. Ruth has cast away her former life and identity. She has committed not only to Naomi, but to Naomi's God. The very God Naomi feels abandoned by. Now, this is incredibly important for us to remember. Sometimes it's the faith of others that help carry us through. Sometimes it's the excitement and passion of new believers that can help carry on a worn-out soul. And I'm telling you, woven into the beauty of this text is this newly committed woman, at least the proclamation is new here, to God, her ways, in the middle of her frustration. So while she is mad at God, her Moabite daughter-in-law is choosing him. It's ironic. Man, and this is awesome. In our sermon planning time, the team brought this up, and they did a good job pointing this out. But it's ironic. As Naomi declares she has come back empty. So think about this. Let this settle in for a moment. As Naomi declares she has come back empty, Ruth is standing next to her. Okay, let me say that again. As Naomi declares she has come back empty, Ruth is standing next to her. She is not empty, but she can't see what God has given. What she has is incredible charitable love and faithfulness. She can't see the seeds of God's work already beginning to grow and what He has already given her, which is powerful. It is powerful charitable friendship. I'm going to invite Alyssa up, and we're going to be done in just a few minutes here as we do this opening, just wrap our minds around this. A number of years ago, one of my good friends, honestly, one of my best friends, we grew up, we played football together in high school. He went on and played college football, awesome guy. We've been accountability partners on and off over the years. An amazing, amazing guy, even called to ministry. He's served as a pastor. One of my best friends in the world. A number of years ago, he called me on the phone, and he said, my wife is pregnant with somebody else's kid. And she's leaving me. This woman broke everything in his life. Now, I don't think you can understand the weight of that unless you've been through it or had a child or somebody close to you go through it, right? You don't understand the weight of this. Everything in his life broke. Everything. His reputation, even available resources to pay for your home. I mean, it's like the income goes away, part of it goes away. I mean, your kids and their stability, their understanding. I mean, how do they understand and know God? And is God good? And I mean, even because he worked in the ministry, his role as a pastor, like, she broke everything. She broke everything in his life. And then you have those conversations where it's like, what next? Where do I go now? What do I do? What do I do with my life? I feel trapped. I can't move away because I want to be close to my kids. But like, I don't even know where, just all question marks. Why would God even allow this? She broke everything. And so over the month or two, he's going to counseling. I'm talking with him. A number of us guys are talking with him on a regular basis. I call him on the phone again, and I call him by name, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? You know, and I mean, it feels weird even saying that when somebody's in such hard place. How are you doing? How are you doing? Good. I mean, like, what are you supposed to say to that, right? So I'm talking on the phone with him, and he's kind of going over all this stuff. I mean, she literally destroyed everything in his life. And I just felt led by the Lord. Sometimes, you know, when you speak, it's like God speaking through you. And other times when you speak, it's definitely you and needs corrected. This was a God one for sure. And he was emotional on the other line. He had kind of paused for a moment. And so I called him by name and I said, hey, I want you to know she can steal and break everything that you have. But she can't steal or break my love for you. Called him by name again, and I said, I'm with you. I'll even drive to your state tonight if you want me to be there. I'm with you. She can't steal my love and care for you. And I got quiet, and he got quiet, and then I start tearing up and crying. I can hear him crying on the other end of the phone line too, right? And so we're both just kind of sitting in the car. I'm sitting in my car on the speakerphone, and you know, he's back at home, and we're just in tears, kind of soaking in the moment. And it hits me. There is something so incredibly powerful about covenant friendship. And even while the enemy was working to destroy his life, to take everything away, to rip him down, it's like tearing a house down to nothing but the studs. The very central thing that God put into his life was a couple of core covenant friendships. And even in the thing that the enemy meant for destruction, God was solidifying something even more powerful, and that was our friendships. I don't think we understand the weight of what Naomi has gone through. She has suffered in massive ways. I'm going to make a couple really clear statements. And again, this is just chapter 1. We're literally going to go a chapter at a time as we work our way through this book. But the first one, a couple statements I want to make. The first statement is this. Even when God isn't working flashy, incredible miracles, because that's what we really want. We would love God to go, bibbidi bobbidi boo, poof, you're a millionaire, right? Like you won the lottery and bibbidi bobbidi boo, poof, there's a new spouse and it's awesome and they look great, right? We would love all these really cool, amazing, over-the-top miracles. But even when God isn't working flashy, incredible miracles, He is still working. He is still working. The next statement that I want to make is this as we get into this. Even when you truly are the victim, it's not your fault. You've been dealt a bad hand. Your body has failed you. You're wrestling with depression, physical illness, whatever it might be. You have been left by people. You've been mistreated by a boss, whatever it is. Even when you are truly the victim, He is still working. He is still working. The next statement I would say is this. Even when you are mad at Him, even when you're mad at God, Naomi is mad at God. Even when you're mad at God, He is still working for you and your benefit, even while you're mad at Him. He is still working. The next thing I would say is this. Even when you can't see it, she literally says, I've come back empty. And this covenant friend, massive committed immigrant lady standing right next to her is like, I'm friends. I'm connected to you. Where you go, I go. Where you die, I'll die. I'm with you till the end. She can't even see this. In the middle of all her pain, she can't even see what God is already beginning to do. Even when you can't see it, He is still working. Right now in your life, in the middle of your hardship, in the middle of your brokenness, in the middle of your frustration, in the middle of your work failure, relational failure, physical failure, financial failure, in the middle of all of this, I want you to know He is still working. God isn't done telling your story. He is still working. In fact, we're going to say this together out loud. All right, you ready for this? I've even got this. Go to the next one. My story isn't done, God's still working, right? My story isn't done, God's still working. I want us to say this together, all right? This is important that you get this. Even if you can't see it, even if you're mad at God, even if you're a victim of a really hard situation, even if your body's failed you, even if relationships have failed you, even if it feels like everything has fallen apart and you're like, this isn't fair, even if you're in the middle of that frustration, my story isn't done, God is still working. I want us to say this together. Are you ready? Here we go. My story isn't done. God is still working. Okay, now, imagine with me, think about the hardest thing that you are facing right now. Say this with me. My story isn't done. God is still working. Say it again. My story isn't done. God is still working in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your frustration, in the middle of feeling abandoned, in the middle of a broken body, broken relationships, broken home, whatever it might be, in the middle of all this. Here we go again. My story isn't done. God is still working. That's the truth. Because sometimes the miracles are massive and big and huge, and you see them, and the blind see, and the lame walk, and the dead come back to life, and bones in the valley have flesh form around them, and they come together, and an army is raised up. Sometimes it's over-the-top miraculous, and sometimes the powerful work of God, you just can't see it, but He is still working. And the opening lines to this glorious ancient story is you see a woman who feels pain and abandonment and brokenness and lost, and she's mad at God, and she stands by herself. And in the middle of all of this, there is this quiet whisper of an all-powerful God already beginning to weave together a new life, because my story isn't done. That's right. That's exactly right. If you would grab the Next Steps card, they're in the back of the chair in front of you. And I love it. We were meeting with the worship arts team and rebuilding services, and we're going to do some cool stuff in the future. But Marcus was actually talking about like this season or this part of the service. And the way he worded it was something like this. It's like, this is your chance to participate in the spiritual formation process. Right? So much of Sunday morning is you observing what we do. You come in on a Sunday morning and you watch or listen to the music and worship, or you listen to a sermon, or you watch a presentation of the scripture through a creative way. This is your chance right now. This is your chance to participate in your spiritual formation. You get to engage. You get to participate. If you are one of our mature saints, you're like, I've already solved all the Christian issues. Fine, get the Next Steps card out and be an example to the people around you. In fact, if you think that, you need the Next Steps card more than you realize you do. And I just want to ask a couple of questions, all right? If you need to make a decision to follow Jesus or rededicate your life, mark it on the card. We want to follow up with you. If you need to be baptized, mark it on the card. If the Spirit's leading you in your heart, mark it on the card. If you need to be in a discipleship group, you are hearing the covenant friendship thing and you're like, man, I could really use that, mark it on the card. If you have any prayer request of any kind, I want you to write it on the card. We pray over these. Any prayer request, write it on the card. But I also want to add this. I've even got this on the screen, so you can put it up there, guys, if you would. On your Next Steps cards, I want you to finish these 2 prayer sentences, all right? These are massively forming. So I'm going to have 2 sentences. I want you to finish these sentences on your prayer card. Take a moment and fill it out. In addition to anything else that was mentioned, I want you to do this. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Father, I commit to be a covenant friend to... Now, why am I doing this? Leave that up for just a second. We all want covenant friendships. We want people to come to us and say, I'm committed to you, I'm with you, I'm for you, I got your back. Do you know how you get covenant friendships? You be a covenant friend. I mean, honestly, maybe for you, you need to put your spouse's name up there. Maybe it's an accountability partner or a friend, but I want you to stop and pause and think. In our post-enlightenment, hyper-individualistic society, we have abandoned this idea that we really need other people. Who can you put in that gap? Father, I commit to be a covenant friend to... Who would you put in there? Whatever they go through, I will not quit on them. Who would you write in that? And if you don't have anybody, you need to be praying, God. You need to mark, I want to be in a D group. That's what you need to put on your card. The second thing that I would say is this. Go to the next slide. As we begin to think about this, Father, open my eyes to see that you have blessed me with. We want to begin to open our eyes, and this is happening right now in the text as we go in between this week and next week. Right now, Naomi is beginning to see the gift that was actually given her. She didn't see it, she's beginning to see it. And so I just want you to pause, and I want you to take a posture of awareness through the power of the Holy Spirit and just go, what are the little things that God has actually given you in the middle of loss or frustration? What are those little nuggets of God's blessing that are actually in your life? Maybe it's an amazing friendship. Maybe it's a verse, a word of the Lord that God has given you. I want you to write it down. I want you just to pause and look and go, wow, you know what? I may have a lot of loss, but God has given me this scripture verse to hang on to. I may have a lot of loss, but God has given me this friend that has stayed committed. I may have a lot of loss, but I want you to become aware of those things. So just finish these. I'm going to do something so intentional with this, and I know it's deep, but fill this out. Father, I commit to be a covenant friend too. Father, open my eyes to see that you have blessed me with. Now is the time for you to participate in your spiritual formation, not just observe it, but you participate in it. So take some time, write on your card as God leads you, go.
We just want to thank you so much for joining us online. If God's working in your heart, we would love to hear from you. Go to www.encountertrinity.com and make sure to look up our information and send us a message. We want to know what God's doing in your heart. We want you to know that you are loved by God and absolutely have a purpose.